The third matter raised in the name of Deputy Desi Ellis to the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs to cut in funding for the Rape Crisis Centre and the impact on services to survivors of sexual violence. And the Deputy has 4 minutes.
Minister, in the words of the network themselves, the Rape Crisis Network are the only independent body for rape survivors in Ireland. They're the only voice for Irish women who have been raped. The RCNI is the national representative body for 11 of the country's 16 rape crisis centres, providing them with oversight and governance, training, research and legal support, as well as running educational campaigns and lobbying on their behalf. It receives around $250,000 a year from TUSLA. That was 70% of its overall funding. That 70% is now gone. The people who depend on the network are still there, and they will be the ones who suffer, having already survived an ordeal. This is a cut which is fundamentally anti-women. It gives the message clearly that services for people who are victims of sexual violence, particularly women, are less important than other services and so open to cuts. This latest move, which will strip the Rape Crisis Network of Ireland of all its funding, will be utterly devastating. It will bring to an end or severely damage vital services that the Rape Crisis Network Ireland provides. The Labour Party committed to tackling and eradicating domestic violence and to protect frontline services in its 2011 election manifesto. How is cutting the funding for the RCNI going to protect this service? The Rape Crisis Centre's most recent figures published show that a substantial increase in the number of people seeking their assistance. Recent years have put even more stress on the services than the centre could provide. Instead of increasing funding to groups like the Rape Crisis Network or Women's Aid and Refuge across the country, we are now faced with a total cut to the network's funding. Up until this decision, funding had already suffered cuts up to 30%, which was made doing the job of the network even harder and put more people at risk. This latest cut is a step way beyond that and is completely and utterly unacceptable. You cannot put a price on the people the network helped. You cannot say you can help this many people and that is that. The network and other such services must be funded to the degree that they are needed in our society. Dr. Cliona Sadler, RCNI Acting Director, said 4 out of 5 survivors of sexual violence are voting with their feet and are not engaging with the justice system or accessing one-to-one counselling. Therefore, for government to effectively say it is sufficient to be funding direct face-to-face services for 20% of survivors, as well as working to improve legislation and the justice process, is not credible. This is not justice. The RCNI was already underfunded and unable to meet the demand for their services. Far too many survivors never come forward. They don't seek help, they suffer in silence. When they do it, it can be a battle to be heard, to be respected, or to get the care they need. By cutting this funding, it sends the message to the women who stay silent that they were right to be, because their state doesn't care. I know that isn't true. I know that this government are not made of bad people on a personal level, but you have allowed yourself in this decision to divorce yourself from the real consequences, and they are not acceptable at all, Minister. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Minister. James Riley, the Minister, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I thank the Deputy for raising this issue. As the question talks about a rape crisis centre, I understand that the Deputy is referring to the Rape Crisis Network Ireland. Yes, sir. I welcome the opportunity to clarify the position with regard to the funding of this organisation. With effect from its establishment in January the 1st, 2014, TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, has taken on statutory responsibility for the care and protection of victims of domestic, sexual or gender-based violence, whether in the context of the family or otherwise. Funding of approximately €17 million transferred to TUSLA from the HSE on the 1st of January 2014 in respect of these services. Additional funding of €2.541 million subsequently transferred to TUSLA from the Department of Environment and Local Government in respect of domestic violence, refuges and services. TUSLA funds 60 specialist domestic violence and sexual violence services, mainly through service arrangements with non-governmental organisations. This year, it will spend over €19 million in supporting 44 domestic violence services and 16 sexual violence rape crisis services. TUSLA has a total revenue budget of €643 million in 2015, including €631 million in current funding and €12 million in capital. This represents an increase of €34 million or 5.6% on funding provided to TUSLA in the budget for 2014. This funding increase demonstrates that despite the budgetary constraints, this government remains strongly committed to delivering the critically important resources and reforms needed to support Ireland's children and families. This additional funding is helping to drive key priorities in the reform of services and is assisting the agency to deliver on its mandate from government. Sexual violence services are being developed by TUSLA as a national specialist service so as to enable better outcomes for both children and adults who are survivors of sexual violence. In this regard, TUSLA has appointed a national manager to ensure a single line of accountability for all resources in this important area. In addition, TUSLA is currently in the process of recruiting 8 additional staff to ensure that domestic, sexual and gender-based violence services are further developed. TUSLA has undertaken a comprehensive review of sexual violence and domestic violence services. The purpose was to identify strategic priorities and set out a roadmap for the delivery of these services. TUSLA considers that there is scope for a more coordinated and more equitable provision of these services across the country. In reviewing the makeup of current services, it is seeking to address any identified gaps in services to avoid duplication and to support effective delivery of frontline services nationally. It's in this context that TUSLA has taken the decision to cease funding of the RCNI and to take on direct responsibility for what is the development and maintenance of a database of information recorded on behalf of the rape crisis centres. Firstly, TUSLA had a number of concerns with regard to the service provided. TUSLA was concerned that this database did not capture information from all 16 rape crisis centres, as only 11 centres are affiliated to the network. In addition, TUSLA did not always have timely access to the data collected, which I'm sure the House will agree is essential to support the planning and delivery of high-quality service across both the domestic violence and sexual violence services sectors. In order to plan properly for the future, TUSLA needs access to complete and reliable information. Consequently, TUSLA has taken the decision to put in place a comprehensive data system that best meets the current and future data needs of a developing service. I'm mindful of data deficiencies across the system, and I have raised the issue of how this should be improved with the Board and the Executive TUSLA as a priority for 2015. I do support TUSLA's efforts to address shortfalls in this area. As part of revised governance arrangements, funded sexual violence services will provide information directly to TUSLA, creating for the first time a comprehensive national data set on all such services funded by the agency. This information is critically important as TUSLA continues to reform services to ensure that we provide the best possible response to survivors of sexual violence. I want to emphasise, Cathaoirleach, that in my discussions this year with TUSLA regarding service delivery, I asked a particular priority be given to protecting frontline services. In this context, I am pleased that funding for the 16 rape crisis centres nationwide, which provide services directly to rape survivors, has been protected in 2015, with funding of almost €4 million allocated to them. Rape Crisis Network Ireland does not provide services directly to survivors of sexual violence. The RCNI continues to be in receipt of funding from other statutory providers such as COSC, the National Office for Prevention of Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence, and the Commission for Support of Victims of Crime. In conclusion, I want to assure the House that the Government and TUSLA are strongly committed to providing effective responses to victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The agency takes a broad view of its responsibilities in this regard, recognising that these issues are complex and require a whole-of-government response. At all times, the first and key priority is to ensure that the needs of victims of sexual violence are being met in the best way possible.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Ellis, you have 2 minutes for supplementary.
Thanks, Minister. But I have to say it's not the first time now I've seen TUSLA causing great problems and identifying areas and putting funding in different areas and taking funding from other areas. St Helena's Resource Centre, we have an issue there over TUSLA. So it's very, very clear. The RCNI is very, very clear that they are losing 250,000. That's what's very, very clear. And if TUSLA are going to recruit 8 additional staff, I suggest they put the money into the services, the frontline services. That's where they should be, into the frontline services. And this is a frontline service. This is a service that delivers a massive amount of advice to people. It deals with 1 in 5 women in our society. Just imagine this. That's literally thousands upon thousands of children that are associated with the women in our society, are witnesses to violence here and are affected in some way. And Minister, since 1996, 207 women were murdered. 54% of these were by their partners or their ex-partners. And clinics run by the RCNI, they have gone to the homes of people, they've given them advice over the phones, they've dealt with people one-to-one, face-to-face. And we've seen the effects of this. I've seen it in my own clinics many, many times, where people have come in as a result of domestic violence, some of them in a terrible, terrible state, apart from being beaten up, emotionally distraught, with children hanging by their sides in some cases. And I have witnessed this on a number of occasions. And the extent of this is probably a lot worse than is even being reported. And often many, many women will not even go to the guards. I'd like to commend the work of Women's Aid, the RCNI and groups that are tackling this issue. The amount of people who've benefited from these services is massive, and we cannot underestimate it. And I think, Minister, I don't think you should be accepting the word of TUSLA in terms of what way they're dealing with their funding, because I've experienced this in other areas, and I am getting very worried about the approach that they've adopted to a lot of projects that I've seen. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Minister. You have 2 minutes for a reply.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be brief and to the point. And once again, I want to just reassure people that the rape crisis centres, all 16 of them across this country, have suffered no reduction in funding. The issue of rape and violence against women is repugnant to all right-minded people. This government is committed to supporting victims of that heinous crime, and is committed to supporting the rape crisis centres. And indeed, from TUSLA's perspective, they are very committed to ensuring that we have got accurate, complete data to ensure that we can plan and make sure that we fill any gaps in those services across our country. I'd just like to remind the Deputy too that in relation to the issue of domestic violence and other organisations that provide services to women in these situations, and indeed to children as well, that there is in the region of 17 million spent a year by the government in this regard. So I want to commend the work of the rape crisis centres, I want to commend the work of their volunteers, and I want to commend the work done by those who support victims of domestic violence as well. And I commit that this government will continue to support these services and will seek to expand them where gaps have been found to exist and where services are difficult for victims to access. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister.